Hello there. So yesterday I watched the Mourinho documentary, which came on to Netflix yesterday. Essentially, it's a three-episode series, mini-series. All the episodes just under an hour each. So I managed to get them all watched yesterday. Essentially, it's the Mourinho documentary. It does what it says in the tin there. So, as it's a documentary, spoilers, so if you can spoil a documentary, but we'll go into certain things on here with that. The first episode focuses mainly on the first time when he first went to Chelsea back in, I think it was 2004. He just won the Champions League with Porto, which to me is still probably his biggest ever achievement. I mean, Porto winning the Champions League, they've been nowhere close to it since then. I mean, they won the FA Cup the year before when they beat Celtic in the final, and then, of course, the year later they won the Champions League. So that is still his crowning achievement in many ways, because for all the stuff that he's won, you know, over the years, that is the crowning achievement. Porto winning the Champions League, they've never been close to it ever again since then. They put Man United out on the group and you know, on the way there to do it as well. So when you still got peak Alex Ferguson that there, although that Man United team that year weren't so great, that was the year of the Arsenal Invincibles in the league. But still, they were underdogs and they did it. So there's not a lot spoken about the Porto thing here, which to me is kind of interesting because it is his crowning achievement. But of course, it's going to heavily focus on his first year at Chelsea, and and you can see as well the camaraderie that had got built up there. Now, a lot of people remember when he did the "I am European champion, I am the special one," and that rubbed the media the wrong way. I had to laugh though because a lot of the media are saying, "Well, we don't do that in England. That's just showing too much arrogance," and I'm like. Not being funny or anything like that, but have you heard your own media when talking about the football team, especially during those days with the so-called golden generation that could never get to the past the quarterfinals? So, you know, not to dig that up again, but I did find that kind of funny. But you know, uh, again, it's one of those things. He really could have set himself up for failure there because if they did not do well that season, or if they disappointed that season, he really looked like a right plonker. But if you can back it up, you can back it up, and there you have it. I mean, you've got the sense as well, like they would go on to win the league that year, and I think they've still got the clean sheet record for that. I think it was 15 goals conceded. I don't think that's ever been broken since then. So they actually got more points than the Arsenal Invincibles the year before. They lost one game. I think it was to Man City, if I remember right, in Anelka. I did show this on here, I don't think, but I do vaguely remember that. But even though they lost one more game than the Invincibles, they didn't draw as much. They actually got more points. I think it was something like 95 points they got, which was a record at the time. Been broken a few times by the likes of Man City and Liverpool, and teams with like Klopp and Guardiola now. But, you know, 95 points, that's astonishing. And that team, they were almost like a winning machine. There was a lot of like 1-0s. They would be there. They'd grind out the results if need be and things. But we also covers other things like you've got like Frank Lampard tells him like when he first came in, he comes and says, "You're the best player in the world, but you don't win titles yet. But you can't be best player until you win titles." There's going to be a few shit impressions. Don't worry. So but then they won stuff. We've got the cup final here, again the Carabao Cup final, or it would have been the League Cup final. I don't know what it was called then, but a game against Liverpool. They were losing, they'd lost to Newcastle in the FA Cup the week before, and lost the first leg to Barcelona as well just before that. So the media was starting to really turn on them, saying, it's falling apart now, and like they really want to see him fall away, but not that managed to grind out that one. Steven Gerrard scored an own goal to equalise as well, and ironically enough, Steven Gerrard was linked with Chelsea during that time. He never played for them, but he did manage to score for them. So there you go. So yeah, so I remember that cup final. That was a great cup final, and of course they would go on to win the league that year. So there was other controversy on here with the Barcelona game. I mentioned that when they talk about the referee, Andres Frisk, the Swedish referee. Apparently, like I vaguely remember this, Mourinho kicked up a fuss because he seen them going into the Barcelona changing room or something like that, or the manager going into the referee's room. Like that would have been Rijkaard would have been manager at that time. So he was kicking up a big fuss about that. Apparently, Frisk got like death threats and had to retire from footballing. So a big controversy about all that. But also the second episode focuses more on how certain things like how Mourinho stopped getting as much control. I didn't really know about this. There's a lot of politics going on in the scene in Chelsea. Like when he actually had full control for the first season, first couple of seasons, whatever. But the third season, they didn't win the league. They'd still won 2 cups, but they didn't win the league the third season he was there. Um, and they talked about there was more people surrounding Abramovich in the box, not just family members or Peter Kenyon and all that. It was loads of other people, lots of hangers-on in there. And they forced him to sign Shevchenko, which he didn't actually want to sign Shevchenko. He didn't think he'd fit in with him. And to be fair, Shevchenko didn't really... He was still pretty much at his peak then, so he didn't really hit the ground running at all at Chelsea. But, he wanted to sign Samuel Eto'o instead. But, he was kind of got forced Shevchenko. And now you could say, oh, poor me, I've got Shevchenko forced on me. Oh, how terrible. But, if he doesn't fit in the system, he doesn't fit in the system. So there is that. And then they show as well, like into at the start of the fourth season, they draw the first Champions League game at home to Rosenborg, and then he's sacked. And then it's interesting to see the way it's sort of framed and all that after that, because he's then talking about, because you've got like John Terry says that players were like grown men were like crying in the dressing room. Now usually when a manager gets sacked, players are quite happy to see the back of them. They're just like, well, beat it, see you later. But on this occasion, they were really upset, of course, to lose him, because they think so fondly of him. So, it's amazing to think that, because usually it is players quite often try and get managers sacked, let's be real. So, but that's one of the rare occasions there with that. But then, after that, he goes on to Italy. They lose to Man United in his first year in the Champions League, but second year, he's got like Ibrahimovic. It's interesting, there was a game with Ibrahimovic at half time. He'd just won Player of the Year in Italy or something like that, and Mourinho's like, "No, you don't deserve that. You should be ashamed of that. You play terrible." And he goes out and plays a blinder in the second half. It's just that's his management style and things like that. And then, of course, Ibrahimovic leaves for Barcelona. This was the dominant Barcelona, the Pep Barcelona. Um, but then Mourinho's like, all right, okay, you can have him, but we'll have cash plus Eto'o. So he eventually got Samuel Eto'o. Second season, not only wins the treble, but wins the Champions League as well. First inter-team since I think it was 1964 or 1965 to do that. So astonishing achievement there, because I've been to a couple of Champions League finals in recent years, like lost narrowly to Man City and got, not this season, but the season before, got absolutely humped by PSG. So, they're not, they're obviously a massive club, but they're not, they haven't won the Champions League or the European Cup that often. So it was a huge achievement. Again, this is another huge achievement for him. It's ironic though. Never won the Champions League with Chelsea, which you would have expected. Never won the Champions League with Real Madrid, which you would have expected. But he did it with Porto and Inter Milan, which is not so, especially Porto, like I said, crowning achievement. But, astonishing. But then he ends up going to Real Madrid then. And you can see there's certain things that kind of work for it, like the whole thing with him and rivalry with him and Guardiola, and of course Barcelona humped them 5-0 in the first Clasico, but the second season again they actually get a lot better. I think they win La Liga and things, but the third season, that's where people start to say the Mourinho thing falls apart in the third season. He gets asked that question, he's like, no, I don't think so, no. But you'd tell that a lot of the Real Madrid players were turning on him as well, and they didn't really want him there anymore. And they lost the cup final to Atletico Madrid. First time they lost in 25 games to Atletico, so it did end quite badly there. Although ironic, he's now going back there, so there you go. But yeah, that was all interesting. And then we come to but then sort of the big revelation of this, and I didn't hear about this before watching the documentary, like Alex Ferguson actually did handpick Mourinho to be his successor in 2013. But then, of course, Mourinho's then like, look, I've given my word to Chelsea, and he wanted to go back to Chelsea because he was beloved there, goes back somewhere where he was loved, essentially. But he apparently when he phoned Alex Ferguson to tell him that, he was crying, and apparently Jose was crying, and saying, "No, I can't do it, can't take the job." To be fair, it's probably a poison chalice. I mean, I do feel sorry in many ways for David Moyes, because to be the first person to follow Sir Alex is impossible. So, even if you look at on a lesser level, Unai Emery at Arsenal, the first guy to follow Arsene Wenger. It didn't work out, and Emery's a fucking great manager. So it kind of is. Maybe it's. Of course, he went to Man United a few years later and won a couple of trophies, and including Europa League. So you know, got a second place finish with him, which is about as good as they've been getting in recent years. So all of that. But so that was all quite interesting as well. Now, of course, goes back to Chelsea, wins the league in his second season. Again, third season, when everyone starts to fall apart. And I do remember this, the game against Swansea, I think it was the first game of the season, the year after they won the league, where they were defending champions. And, there was a thing where I think it was Hazard went down, and then the doctor comes on, the female doctor comes on out and forces them to come off, and they were down to 10 men at a time, so they'd be playing with 9 players then. And you see Mourinho going absolutely ballistic, and it's not absolute, and it's not beeped or anything like. You hear him, he's going, "You fucking, what the fuck are you doing? You fucking." And I remember there was a big controversy about this as well. Now, Mourinho's stance is interesting here because it's like, whether it be male doctor or female doctor, I would be the same, which is fair enough because, equal opportunities and all that. So I can see where he's coming from there with that. But, there was a big sort of controversy about that. And that was right at the start of that season. And everything just went wrong in that time. He was sacked by Christmas. I mean, they were like 17th when he got sacked there. So bit of a disaster, but there you go. But it's interesting. Like I said, I mentioned that he's back at he's going to be back at Real Madrid. I kind of thought his time at the top, like the very very top clubs, was over because now he'd been in Turkey. I mean, was with Fenerbahce and lost to Rangers, all fucking teams. A year and a bit ago. Yeah, be about a year and a half ago. I mean, Barry Ferguson was the manager there, so losing to the ex-manager of Clyde. But there you go. But and it was at Benfica last year. Of course, they beat Real Madrid in the group stages, but then lost them in the knockout stages. But so he's back at Real Madrid, which I'm kind of surprised about. But we'll see. It's love him or hate him. He's definitely some character, and I thought this was a really interesting documentary. There's plenty to talk about in it. I've been prattling on for over 10 minutes now, but overall, really interesting. The fact that I actually watched all of them the same day, kind of, and didn't feel the time drag in or anything like that, kind of shows that I was quite into this documentary. Anyway, thanks for taking the time to listen, and goodbye.